webcast for December 6, 2019. Today's webcast will be a discussion on some issues related to assisted suicide and euthanasia. My name is Christian Debré, and this is Amy Asbrook, the director of Toujours Vivant, Not Dead Yet. I'd like to ask each person to introduce themselves, starting with Taylor Hyatt. Taylor.
Hey, I'm Taylor Hyatt. I'm the policy analyst and outreach coordinator at Toujours Vivant, Not Dead Yet. I've been the one who was in charge of most of the invitations, and it's good to see you all.
Okay, thank you. Mike?
My name is Michael Swan. I'm an editor at the Catholic Register. I'm more of an observer here. We're interested in Not Dead Yet's views on the upcoming MAID legislation.
Okay, thank you. Jonathan?
My name is Jonathan Marchand. I'm the president of Co-Offices, which is Quebec Cooperative for Independent Living. I was offered euthanasia before. I'm forced to live in an institution in Quebec. I want to get out. I'm trying to put a program in place so that people with severe disabilities in Quebec can live in the community just like everyone else.
Okay, thank you. Trish, please. She's not there. Diane, please.
I'm Diane Coleman with Not Dead Yet USA.
Hey, Diane.
Nice to
Hi.
see you, Diane.
Nice to see you.
Heidi.
Hello, I'm Claire of the ethical recovery.
Okay, thank you. Kathleen?
Yes, hello. Pleasure to meet you. My name is Dr. Kathleen Thompson. I'm the treasurer with Dawn Canada, the Disabled Women's Network. And we're really concerned about the misuse of MAID. And so pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Trish, please.
Hello.
Trish Nichols.
Yes,
Hello?
I'm Trish. Hi, Trish Nichols is here.
Yeah, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, I'm Trish Nichols. This is my husband, Gary Nichols.
Hello.
And our brother, Gary's brother, Alan Nichols, was assisted with a suicide that was really actually quite a wrongful death. And that was in July. And so we decided to join Alex upon the invitation today so we can assist and participate in the meeting.
Okay, Maxime, could you introduce yourself?
I am Pat Wood.
Okay.
My name is Pat Wood, and I'm very interested in this issue because I have post-polio syndrome. I had polio at age 5, and so I am actually being threatened. My own life can be threatened because of the fact that the law changed in Quebec because of the Truchon case.
Yeah.
So this puts me at high risk, possibly of being euthanized against my will if I were to go into a hospital. And my own mom and dad died through euthanasia, one in 1999 and the other one in 2003.
Okay.
And neither one of them wanted euthanasia, but both of them were yes. My mother died by changing her order to do not resuscitate, and my dad, they just wouldn't treat him, and he died a week later after they sent him home for my mom to care for.
Okay, Maxime, please. You introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Maxime. I'm director of Living with Dignity. So I just joined you. I don't know everyone, I think.
It's why everybody introduce himself.
Right.
So you have at least a basic knowledge of everybody.
Good. Well, we'll be glad to listen to you all. So I'm
Great.
interim director of Living with Dignity since 2 months.
Okay. Do we miss somebody? Kathleen, I think.
No, Kathleen already spoke.
Sandra is
Sandra is the transcriber.
LB.
There's
LB, yeah.
And Alex Schadenberg joined you by phone.
okay.
Hi, Alex.
Nice
Hi,
to-
Alex.
nice
Hi,
to-
Alex.
Alex.
Hello, everyone. Good.
Yeah. LB, please.
Do you
No
need
comment? Okay.
Melanie?
Yeah, Melanie, go.
Oh, hi, thanks. So yeah, I have a neuromuscular disease that the Ontario government doesn't want to pay to diagnose properly. My attendant is showing up sometime over the next half hour to an hour, so I might have to jump out, but I'm very interested in what you do, and I really appreciated the weekly updates, so I'm just checking in, hoping to learn more. I'm an academic, just finishing up my dissertation, not explicitly disability related, but yeah, and I'm a wheelie. That's about it.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. Toujours Vivant, Not Dead Yet, is a non-religious organization by and for people with disability and our allies. We believe that the choice to die is not free as long as old, ill, and disabled people don't have a free choice in where and how they live, and that must change. As we said in our invitation, our goal for this meeting are two: learning about how the medical assistance in dying law is failing people with disability. Secondly, look at the political and legal option to challenge or modify the made law. And the third one is build a supportive community of people who face pressure to end their lives. We'll start by giving some case history and talk about euthanasia in Quebec. Then we will move on to outline some of the political and legal options and finally talk about how to support each other. We will invite comments and questions as we go along. Does anyone have anything they like to add or a topic?
Yes. I just want to let everybody know that the folks in the LB window introduce themselves. Hi, Ian and Lisa. I know you guys don't have access to a mic, but we look forward to reading your comments in the chat.
Thank you.
Great. And Taylor, if you could take care of reading those comments, that would be great.
Will do. And also, John Sikkema has joined us. Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
John, could you introduce yourself briefly?
Yes, I'm legal counsel with ARPA Canada. ARPA's been quite involved in this issue, and I'm also here with Andre Schuten,
Okay.
And
director.
John, I know who ARPA is. Not everybody here does. Could you please remind us what that stands for?
Sure. This is why we like the acronym, but it's the Association for Reformed Political Action. It's a Christian public policy advocacy group. We have a government relations side, and then we also have kind of a educating Christians about public policy and legal issues side to what we do. So there you go.
Awesome. Glad you're here.
Great. All right. Just to let you all know, we're recording the meeting and it will be available on our YouTube site. So if you don't want to be recorded, don't say anything. Okay. Okay. How the MAID law is failing people with disabilities. We are concerned about three trends that we've observed in how the MAID law is working in practice. First, that people facing social and economic pressures to request euthanasia. Second, ineligible people are being euthanized. And third, safeguards are not being followed. So we have some news stories and case histories, and we're going to touch on the Alan Nichols case, but we'll ask Trish to talk more about that in a few minutes. In August, we talked about the death of Sean Taggart, a man with ALS who needed 24-hour support to live independently. The British Columbia health authorities would only provide 20 hours per day and suggested he move into an institution far from his family. He believed death was preferable to the limitations of institutional life and was euthanized in August. Alan Nichols was hospitalized in June after several distressing life changes led him to stop caring for himself. While in the hospital, he made a request for euthanasia and was approved and died in July of this year. Mr. Nichols' family is trying to find out how he could be deemed eligible for MAID without a grievous and irremediable medical condition, but with a history of untreated depression. As well, we recently discussed 3 case histories provided by Toronto Dr. David D'Souza. First, Janice's family asked Dr. D'Souza to euthanize her when he visited her in a nursing home. Dementia had affected her ability to communicate and recognize her loved ones. Her family showed him a 10-year-old will to prove that she did not want to live with severe cognitive deficits. Dr. D'Souza told the family that Janice was not eligible for euthanasia because she must make the request herself, not her family, and she was not competent to consent when euthanasia was administered. The second case brought by Dr. D'Souza was Eddie. He wanted to be euthanized as a way to relieve his suffering after deciding to stop dialysis. Once Dr. D'Souza arranged for palliative care, Eddie died peacefully and comfortably and of natural causes. And finally, Jim wanted to be euthanized after discovering hardness in his abdomen, but without a definitive diagnosis. After Dr. D'Souza encouraged him to seek further tests and consultations, which he refused, he was found eligible for medical assistance in dying by the MAID team at his local hospital. In a final meeting, Dr. D'Souza found Jim and his family preparing for the big event, his death by euthanasia. So those are a few of the many cases that we've run across. Does anybody, first of all, Trish, do you want to talk a little more about what happened with Alan?
Yeah, definitely want to talk about that. I'm going to let Gary speak because that's Alan is Gary's brother.
Yeah.
And okay. We both feel the very same, and Wayne is Gary's other brother. So Alan had 2 brothers, Gary and Wayne. Wayne is living in BC. We're in Alberta, so he's not able to be here with us. But we, as a unit, as a unified unit, feel that there was a terrible mistake and that this should have never occurred. And we are getting such a runaround with we've sent 27 letters now, right? One to Prime Minister Trudeau as well. And for every letter that we've sent, other than one letter that we sent to an MLA in Chilliwack, which is where Alan was euthanized, we've been getting the runaround. We still have not received an answer from the Chilliwack Hospital as to one reason why they granted Alan assisted death. We still don't know one reason why. And we know that he did not meet the legal threshold for MAID and or according to Bill C-14 for assisted death. So we are talking about a person that is mentally depressed and, like you said, wasn't taking medications. So I'm going to let Gary continue the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Just to go further on that, we did request medical records and patient care, quality care by the Fraser Valley Health. The report was supposed to be forwarded to our family on October 8th, and the member that was in charge of preparing the report asked for an extension, and that extension was to be November 5th. November 5th came along and he says, geez, I wanted to release it this week, but I need just a little bit more time. Well, it's now December 6th, and we still haven't received anything. So this is 4 months after a report that they say should take 40 days. So it's just another red flag that shows that the government bodies are talking back and forth. They're not forwarding us the information. And they're really just asking us to challenge us because they don't want to give us the truth. And just because we all know, we've taken it to other physicians and they've looked and they said they would never have approved Alan. And so I think they made a mistake. I think the physicians involved did not use due diligence and obtain all the necessary information to even fill out the form. I'm not even sure if the two doctors that approved his application for MAID even visited him. That they just looked at his health chart and filled out some numbers. And Alan's family doctor definitely didn't go to bat for him. She just says, well, Alan wants to make his own decisions. She has nothing to do with the MAID application, but she sure didn't do the right things for him because she had actually given Alan the MAID application 2 years earlier. Now, if he really wanted to go through something like that, he would have filled out the form and filed it before he was in the hospital, because when he went to the hospital in June 2019, it wasn't even on his accord. It was because he was mistreating himself that the police thought he should go in there for the better of his well-being. And because Alan was mad at everybody due to his mental illness, he didn't, consult with family or anything. He just wanted to all he wanted to do was die at that point. Now they kept him in the hospital, and yet they were treating him for nothing. Why wouldn't they have released him from the hospital? There was no reason to even keep him there. He could have came back whenever they wanted to do the euthanization. So it's really been a red flag mishandled case, and we're going to have to see where it goes. And it might take a long, long time here for us to get the right answers because they don't really want to cooperate and give us the truth. And the one thing we know for sure, nobody is above the law. I don't care how that bill's written. They can say physicians aren't guilty or don't have a civil lawsuit that you can attach them. I think that's all wrong because nobody is above the law. So that's what we really need, a body to kind of go to work on this and see what in order to keep a leash on this, because we can't keep on having manipulation by the physicians on this.
Yeah. And in fact, I mean, they are supposed to report euthanasias within 30 days on the federal level. Mm-hmm. And the fact that they have not been able to produce his medical reports for 3-4 months indicates something's screwy going on.
Yeah.
And it's consistent with what we've seen in Quebec. Does anybody else want to talk about their experience? Jonathan, do you want to talk about your experience?
Yeah, sure. I have muscular dystrophy. I've been having a disability all my life. And in 2010, I ended up in the ICU because I had a bad case of pneumonia. And at that point, they had to offer me support to breathe. So I had to have a tracheotomy, and now I use a ventilator to breathe. And they offered me repeatedly euthanasia, what they call comfort care, because, and that happened in 2010, because they told me that I could never leave the hospital because there's no support to live in the community. And 3 doctors actually offered me euthanasia. So to give me morphine and then unplug my ventilator. And I refused. However, I never thought that these people, the doctors, the nurses, the professionals, were there to help me kill myself. I mean, I always thought that these people were there to help me live. And I found it incredibly violent to have that suggested to me repeatedly. And after that, I thought about it and I decided not to go ahead with this option. But I ended up stuck in the hospital for the rest of my life. Since 2010, I've been living either in a hospital or a long-term care facility, and there's no way out. Actually, the laws in Quebec don't allow a person like me to live in the community. The discrimination I face is coded into law. So in the last few years, I've been working on a project to implement a new self-directed personal assistance program for people with severe disabilities so they can live in the community, participate to society, and contribute to society so that our human rights are respected and our citizenship is respected. But this highlights that there's no free choice in this currently in Canada. You know, often you are either choosing to die or become a burden, you know, or live the rest of your life into a medical prison because institutions are fundamentally incompatible with life. I mean, it has nothing to do with life in the community, and it's incredibly damaging to live in such a place. And many people want to die either or because they don't want to face that prospect. And I understand that. Actually, it's even worse than you think. It goes beyond. It goes way. It it deprives you from your freedom, and life without freedom is very difficult. Actually, me and my life has no meaning. It had no meaning for many years, but these days I'm putting all my energy into putting together a solution. So where I'm talking to the government to get this going, we want to start with a pilot project so that we can demonstrate that there's another way to do things, because the government is only proposing to us to continue putting us into institutions, or they want to improve home care services, but those services are a barrier, an obstacle to our inclusion in society. So there are solutions other than the final solution.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we should be doing. That's the conversation we should be having.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else have anything they want to add urgently, or shall we?
Yeah,
move on?
I would like to speak up if you don't mind.
Sure, go ahead.
It's Pat Wood speaking. I just want to share with the fact that in 1999, my father went to a hospital. He was 89 years of age, and he had a fall a couple of days earlier at his doctor's office on ice. And we think probably it traumatized him and maybe caused some shock for his system. But nevertheless, he ended up with not being able to walk and having difficulties over the next 2 days with losing liquids. And he became dehydrated on the Thursday, 2 days later after the fall. And he was taken to the hospital and by my mother, and they refused to treat him, but sent him home instead by ambulance for my 79-year-old mother to care for. And my dad, although he was having a nurse coming in each day to check on him, continued to go downhill until his kidneys were completely failed within 3 days. And then the following day, they admitted him into a nursing home, but he ended up with a stroke. And then 2 days later, he died. After having the kidney failure, the stroke, and double pneumonia, we were told. that he ended up with. So he was 89, and he'd been a relatively healthy man prior to that, except for a bit of high blood pressure, but he was a farmer, and he was still going out and, you know, working sometimes with a tractor and those kinds of things. And my mother, 3 years later, she was dying of cancer, and we were caring for her a bit. And we went to one of the hospitals to get her drained of the liquid from her she was on, she had cancer of the liver. Anyway, they drained her the first time and then sent her home for us to care for her again. And when we went her back the next time, I had been dealing with one doctor all along, and I had a power of attorney for her. So she was supposed to be, they were supposed to be consulting with me about what they were doing with her, as well as talking with her, which they were doing. But unfortunately, they changed the doctor. A new doctor was brought in without our knowledge. They changed the order to do not resuscitate and started taking away water the next day for certain. And then I know that because I overheard the nurse saying she couldn't have it. And then they also I believe may have been taking away food. But anyway, she wasn't eating after a couple of days. And then she died a few days later on the Wednesday. This was on a Friday when we changed the doctor. And on Wednesday she died.
Okay, Pat,
and the doctor wanted her out of the hospital.
We're going to have to move on. But we get the basic facts. So
okay, well, I was just going to say that when the doctor called me in, I was supposed to have a meeting that Wednesday, and she told me she wanted her out of the hospital the next day because they needed the bed. And that night, my mother died while I was gone to have some supper. So, yeah, there definitely was. And I got a copy of a chart later and found out that yes, the order said do not resuscitate on the Friday when the new doctor came in without our knowledge.
And that's a very common occurrence that people's orders are changed that way without their knowledge or consent.
Wow.
Okay. So, though the interim reports from the Federal Medical Assistance in Dying Law offer little details, the Commission on End-of-Life Care in Quebec has released 4 annual reports and a summary of euthanasia in that province since the practice began on December 10th, 2015. And we have links to our coverage of those reports. The Quebec reports have provided some information, yet they contain inconsistencies and lack important details. But it's important to note that Quebec has a procedure for verifying the number of euthanasia by cross-checking doctors' declarations of euthanasia against reports from institutions. And this doesn't exist in the federal monitoring system. So the first federal report is supposed to come out in March of next year. And there's no way to verify, because if a doctor doesn't submit the report, there's nobody follows up. No one knows. So here are some observations that we've had from Quebec. In Quebec, 2,909 euthanasia have been reported since December of 2015, while 2,947 continuous palliative sedations have been documented. And remember that in Quebec, continuous palliative sedation doesn't require an application or an approval. The person can just
ask. That's it.
The Commission has recorded 15 euthanasia of people who were not eligible. That's 15 people who died weren't eligible. In 64 cases, the Commission determined that safeguards were not respected. And that
I don't understand. There is 64 not respected, and there is only 15 who are not eligible. Something goes wrong about that. It's supposed to be 64, 64, or 15, 15. But
And in 2 of those cases of the 64, the doctor met the person they were euthanizing on the same day that they performed the euthanasia. So for the first time. Of the declaration forms submitted to the Commission, 84 came in more than 6 months after the euthanasia was provided, even though they're supposed to come in within 10 days. The Commission had to pursue doctors to get 60 euthanasia declaration forms in order to produce its summary report. And 11 declarations were never produced. So doctors in 11 cases, we don't know if it's 11 doctors or not, obviously, but they never produced a declaration that they euthanized someone. The number of requests, I'm sorry, the summary report mentions around 20 euthanasia that were not reported by doctors or facilities, but which came to light following audits by institutions. The euthanasias were identified through the pharmacy records. So neither the institution nor the doctor reported the euthanasia. It was found through an audit of the pharmacy record. The number of requests was 10 times more than anticipated before the program started, and 65% of requests are approved and the people euthanize. The average time between signing the request and administration of euthanasia was 12 days, and 40% of euthanasia occurred within 10 days of the request. And there's supposed to be a 10-day waiting period, which can be waived in urgent circumstances. So I guess they're deciding that 40% of those cases are urgent. Euthanasia and continuous palliative sedation each accounted for 1.9% of deaths in Quebec between April 1st, 2018 and March 31st, 2019, for a total of nearly 4% of all deaths in the province. Does anybody have anything they want to comment on those numbers?
Not on those numbers, but two related things. Did we skip the case histories? And Ian and Lisa wrote their story in the chat box for us.
Okay, we did not skip the case histories, but why don't you read Ian's and the case from the chat box?
Wonderful. So they say, hello, our story is similar to Jonathan's in a lot of ways. Ian's a quadriplegic from a spinal cord injury long ago. He was hospitalized last year, and for part of that hospitalization, he required a ventilator in the ICU. He had trouble weaning off the vent and was told a tracheostomy would help with that, and then hopefully he could get off his ventilator. We were shocked when a new doctor suggested another option, that he could have the breathing tube removed and be kept comfortable as he waited for death. The doctor seemed to be trying to convince Ian that life with a ventilator would not be worth living because he might have to stay in the hospital. We pushed for the trach surgery and Ian got off the ventilator a few weeks later. He came home. In Ontario, the self-managed attendant services program allows many people with ventilators and high levels of physical disability to live in the community.
Great. Okay, does anybody else?
Where's the accountability? I have a question.
Yeah.
Where is the accountability for the doctors that aren't reporting? Where are these what's happening with the government that's supposed to be overseeing all of the procedures and the structures in place? We're killing people and we're not having to be held accountable for it. I don't understand this.
And the monitoring system, the monitoring regulations specifically say in their background part of the regulations, it specifically says that Health Canada is not responsible for when doctors and nurse practitioners do not comply with the regulations.
Who is then?
It's supposed to be up to police and law enforcement.
Local law enforcement.
As Nichols' family has found, those bodies are not taking care of it either.
At all. As a matter of fact, they're not. The BC Ministry of Health told us, the Chief Coroner's Office told us that if we wanted to open an investigation, we needed to ask the RCMP. We had already sent a letter to the RCMP, and they said it was out of their jurisdiction. So still the question is, who is accountable for a wrongful death in this country? Who is the person that must be spoken to, or the story must be shared with in order for something to come of light? You said that there was 15 of 64. I heard the numbers that you mentioned, Amy, but there's a whole mess of documentation that seems to be missing. And you know, if they're not going to report these things, isn't that right in defiance of the bill itself? It's a requirement.
Right. And you know,
And Amy's only referring to Quebec also.
yeah, I was giving information from Quebec. The federal statistics probably won't have as much detail as Quebec does.
Right. Right.
And you know, I had to look in great detail deep into the report to find this information. It was not easy to find, and the media certainly is not picking up on this. So that's part of the reason I wanted to have this meeting, so people could, you know, understand that there's a big problem here and talk about it together.
And in fact, Trish, you've actually hit the nail on the head, Trish. It isn't being controlled at all. That's the point.
Right.
Right. And so but you know, there's no do-overs when it comes to death. It's not like you can make a mistake and clean it up.
Yeah, exactly.
I really believe that we need a class action lawsuit then right across this whole country. And it's right at the federal government, because they're the ones that should have been in control of this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the law is made for protecting doctors and medicals and the political, not people.
Right, exactly. Okay, last summer, Toujours Vivant, Not Dead Yet developed a data collection form to record people's stories in a more organized way to get ready for the 5-year review of Canada's euthanasia law that was supposed to start next June. Well, of course, the Truchon decision means that Parliament will be modifying the MAID law before that time, and the study may be postponed indefinitely. But we still need to gather people's stories and, you know, in a process like this, so that we can put it out to the media, so that we can educate the members of Parliament, so that they're hearing not just from people who want to die, but people who have been adversely affected by this law. Besides problems with the MAID program, we're also looking at related life-ending practices, such as continuous palliative sedation, refusal to provide medically necessary care, food and hydration, and rush to judgment of that continued care is futile. Does anybody want to add anything?
Yes, hi, Kathleen here. I'm a resident of Regina, Saskatchewan, where we have the highest rate of violence against women in the country, and where Robert Latimer was able to murder his daughter. And you may know that Robert Latimer right now is looking to overturn his conviction.
Right.
Yes,
and Dawn Canada is going to be looking at aligning with others to fight that, because we're concerned about that.
Yeah.
But one thing I want to throw into the mix here that I'm concerned about, I mean, first of all, I'm so sorry about the stories I'm hearing from people on the line of having a family member murdered, in my view, or being pushed into MAID. These are very distressing stories. I was adopted into a family and raised in and escaped from that has a condition you may be familiar with, or if you're not, I'd like to raise awareness of it, which is Munchausen syndrome by proxy, also called fictitious disorder imposed on another. Now, is anyone aware of this condition?
Yeah.
Okay, so just really briefly, Munchausen syndrome is when a person, much more severe than being a hypochondriac, literally makes themselves sick. They may drink poison or do things that really make them sick, causing infections and surgeries. And then Munchausen's by proxy is when family members, parents generally, get a lot of information about the health system and then make their children sick. And it's a horrible condition. And 10%, we feel 1% of the population is afflicted with this condition. So it's as many people epidemiologically as who have, say, schizophrenia. So these are large numbers. And 10%.
There's a related phenomenon of parents of children with autism who try to do these cures that are actually poisons and deadly
Sure.
treatments, quote unquote.
Sure. Yeah, and so we're working at Dawn Canada, and I'm also the co-chair of the National Network for Mental Health. So we're wanting to work on doing research and developing some strategies to help people. This is in the category, it's medical abuse, it's Munchausen's, it's the category you just mentioned, and then also the misuse of MAID. So I'm concerned about families. I'll just wrap up here. I'm concerned about families that have this condition, using MAID to kill their family members, especially when there's money involved in estates. So I know of cases of this happening, and so I throw this into the mix, and we need lawyers to work with us on this.
Yep. Thank you.
And police.
Yep. Okay. Let's talk about some political and legal options. As you all probably know, a Quebec Superior Court judge declared the reasonably foreseeable natural death eligibility criterion unconstitutional in September. It's when Bill C-14 was passed, the disability community tried to get lots and lots of safeguards in, and the only one we got was reasonably foreseeable natural death. That was supposed to distinguish between disabled people and people who were at the end of life. But that having been declared unconstitutional, there are now no real safeguards in the law. Since the Attorney General did not appeal the Truchon decision, Parliament has until March 11th of 2020 to modify the federal MAID statute. The end of life requirement in the Quebec law was also struck down, and the provincial government has already announced plans to expand eligibility, and they've produced a 175-page report about why it would be a great idea to allow people with dementia or Alzheimer's to have euthanasia via an advanced directive. So the Council of Canadians with Disabilities and the Canadian Association for Community Living are meeting with the Attorney General's staff, Minister of Disability Inclusion, Carla Qualtrough, and the Health Minister about the assisted suicide and euthanasia statute. Among the ideas that are being considered, one is to preserve the end-of-life criteria in a way so as to protect the equal right to live with dignity and respect. Secondly, would be defining external pressure to include socioeconomic and other factors that lead to vulnerability. And finally, making the vulnerable person standard part of a formal capacity assessment process. At the same time, Parliament and Quebec's National Assembly are facing a lot of pressure from pro-euthanasia activists to expand eligibility, especially to children under 18 years old, people with dementia via advanced directives, and people who want euthanasia for psychological reasons. Anybody want to comment on that?
I'll just say something that it's obvious where they're going with this. Medical health is a big cost, and we can eliminate a lot of those costs by not having prolonged health care for patients, and the euthanization is fast, clean, cheap, and that's the only reason that the government would be doing this, because they don't want to spend the money that would require to do a humane, quality patient care. So.
Yeah. And there was a study that came out in January of 2017, so 6 months after the law came into effect, that talked about how much money Canada can save.
Yeah, it kind of really strikes a chord with me too on this, Amy, and everyone present, because if that's ultimately what doctoring is about now, because doctoring to me and what we understand doctoring to be is the preservation of life. And so now the actual concept of doctoring somehow has changed. And I know doctors who don't agree with this at all. And yet their hands are being forced, or their institutions are being forced to have a space available for this. So, there's so much controversy about, what is the best recourse for the conditions that exist, because there will always be mental and physical health care required in this country. So now the government is responsible and now also determining just who meets the eligibility in our country to live. Not die, but to live.
Right, exactly.
That's what it's coming down to. Now, how is it possible that the people of this country, our nation, have allowed that? Like, where is, again, there's no policing of the government. Now, you know, the government doesn't get free reign. There's got to be some way to pull this in somehow. I don't know if it's like a legal, you know, like I agree with Gary. Maybe it's time to take a real hard stand on a civil lawsuit. It may take years to achieve our goal, but if we don't start doing something now, these numbers are just going to keep going up, and the government is still going to be getting far more control over our health care, and yet we're still paying the money for it. Same, if not more, to have health care. So, you know, honestly, I mean, I'm sitting here just listening to this going, well, what the hell's happened?
Yep. And this is, you know,
it's so huge.
I have to speak up and agree with this, because if I go to a hospital right now with post-polio syndrome, and that woman, I've forgotten her name, the one that changed the law, she has put me at major risk to be euthanized because I have post-polio syndrome. And even if I don't want to be euthanized, I now could be considered by some doctor or nurse or somebody that's, you know, thinking that my life isn't worth living, that it doesn't matter if I want it, they decide it for me. And that can very easily happen, and I don't want to go to hospitals or nursing homes anymore.
Right.
How can they change the orders? How can they change the orders without permission from the patient and or family?
They are.
Right.
I just don't
hold on.
understand.
Heidi wanted to jump in. Heidi?
I just want to
I just want to identify another huge piece of the puzzle. It's the mainstream media. People with disabilities who want to die are getting loads of airtime. But when people like Sean Taggart or Alan are forced into Maine, CCD sent out hundreds of media releases. We got no response.
So we have to find them.
So we have to find some way to force ourselves into the public discourse.
Yep. Thank you, Heidi.
Yeah, I can confirm that. It's the same thing. I tried to go public with my story, and it's very difficult. We got a report on CTV, but that was it. No other media outlet was really interested. So yeah, it's very difficult. The perception is that, you know, in the population, that it's better to die than to have a disability. So it plays right into that, why we don't get much traction. And it's much more, I think, profitable for media to talk about, you know, shock stories of people who want to die than to talk about people who want to live, who have solutions as well.
Good point.
Okay. So on the legal front, there are still a couple of cases pending. One is, the best known is probably that of Roger Foley, who brought a complaint against the Ontario government and others when he was denied self-directed personal assistance services, was endangered by the negligence of home health agency staff, and was offered euthanasia and harassed by hospital staff. Mr. Foley also filed a complaint under the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which led to a meeting with the special rapporteur in April of this year. We invited Mr. Foley, but we never heard back from him. In a related case, nursing home residents in Quebec, led by Daniel Pilote, have filed a class action over unsafe and inhumane conditions in long-term care facilities in the province. And other possible legal actions we've heard about that may or may not happen. A wrongful death claim brought by Alan Nichols' family. You guys can talk a little about that in a sec. A demand for access to palliative care brought by Ing Wong Ward and her husband, and a claim for access to self-directed personal assistance services that is being contemplated by Heidi Jans. Do you, either the Nichols or Heidi, do you want to talk about those cases?
Our case right now, we have consulted with a lawyer, and there's two different scenarios for our case. And so what we need is the medical records in order to proceed with filing the wrongful death suit, because they have information that we don't have, and we need to see that before we would take it to that next level. But that is our desire. It is our desire to seek that a wrongful death suit so that there will be changes made. Because I think if there's a case like ours that hits a media attention, and for all the right reasons, I think that it would enlighten more people in this country to what's really going on, first of all, behind the scenes. Because until July, we weren't aware of any of this, none of this. And I mean, we knew that there was assisted death that had come in, but we thought, like most everyone that I have actually talked with about this entire process has said the same thing. We thought it was designed for people who are in the very last stages of a bedridden disease that is terminally ill, and it is kind of basically almost the humane thing to do to let them go. That's what we thought this was, the bill and assisted death was all about. We had no idea that there were people that wanted to die, that just didn't want to live in Canada, whatever reasons, whether it's physical disabilities, mental disabilities, whatever. They just want to apply for it, and that's it. They just don't want the weight of the suicides, or they just have a terminal illness and they just don't want to wait it out 5 months to see if there's a cure. This is really what we thought the bill was about. So we are shocked from finding out what we've been reading, and so grateful that Alex has approached us, and we are now wanting to take that information that we've gained and working also with people with disabilities, because Alan did have a disability. He had a hearing disability. He was hearing disabled. And so all the information that they would have shared with him in a hospital would have had to been written on a whiteboard, and they completely excluded the family. They locked us away from him. They said he didn't want to see us. And so we weren't allowed to be involved in any of it. And so now, because the law has stretched itself beyond reproach, I believe that we need to file this wrongful death suit, because someone has to be held accountable for murdering in a hospital facility, fully knowing that they are injecting a patient in front of their family that doesn't want this to happen, without an irremediable disease and without a long-term illness.
Right.
So
okay,
we have to really stand up and do that. And if it takes our family to start the ball rolling, we'll do that. But we need the medical records, because we don't know what is in there yet.
Okay. Heidi, did you want to talk about what you're pursuing?
Yeah. No, I live in
I live in an integration building
with
people with disabilities and able-bodied people. The people who have disabilities need support. our own people.
But because there are more of us, we can cooperatively
Because there's more of us, we can cooperatively
manage our care.
There are 2 other buildings like us in Edmonton. As far as we know,
we are anomaly.
We are not normal. In Canada.
No.
2 years ago. A few years ago, the provincial government
decided to
contract out
our
home care services, all home care services in the province for for-profit agencies, which would have shut us down. It took us going to the premier
and making
her cry before we got the decision reversed.
But
we know that it's only a matter of time before the same thing happens again. So we're preparing the Lord for a court challenge lawsuit to make both our model of home care and self-managed home care to become core services under the Canada Health Care Act. We're still only in the early stages. We're actually still looking for a lawyer. And down the road, we're hoping that more people with disabilities. I'm looking at you, Jonathan. Will join us. But that's a summary of what we're trying to do.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I just wanted to point out that in Quebec alone, about 70% of people with severe disabilities live in different institutions. So it's a minority who manage to survive outside institutions. And I say survive. Our support system in Canada is broken for people with disabilities. And when you see people wanting to die, it's directly a result of that failed system. And the discussion we should have is how to fix the system so that everyone has the choice and control over their life.
And in fact, Canada already has obligations. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities guarantees certain rights that are directly related to assisted suicide and euthanasia. First is Article 10, the right to life, and that requires state parties, or in that section, states parties reaffirm the inherent right to life, and state parties undertake to take all necessary measures to ensure the effective enjoyment by persons with disabilities on an equal basis with others. So those are the key phrases in the CRPD Article 10. Article 19 talks about living independently and being included in the community. And specifically, Section B says that persons with disabilities should have access to a range of in-home services, including personal assistance services, necessary to support living and inclusion in the community and to prevent segregation and isolation. And finally, Article 25 on health has a couple of sections. Persons with disabilities have the right to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of health without discrimination, including those health services needed by persons with disabilities specifically because of their disabilities, and to prevent discriminatory denial of health care or health services or food and fluids on the basis of disabilities. And that gets back to what Pat was talking about. There are some instruments in the United Nations that talk about palliative care, but it isn't very organized. And my sense is that they're in the process of trying to make that more organized, but I did include a link to a paper on that topic. And also the optional protocol allows individuals to bring complaints, and they're called communications under the convention. And I have a link to how to do a page for more information about how to do that. Does anybody have anything they want to add?
Maxine, you did, yeah.
Yeah, I got to go, so just a few things before I leave. Quick things, more general. About the legal procedures, I think they are important, but the thing is they won't affect the law itself. They'll affect individual cases, and it can do good, but it won't affect the law itself. And we know that the end of life criterion will fall, and we know that the law will be revised within months or within the next year. So I think this one important thing is that this revision of the law can be an opportunity for us to push for accountability, first of all, to increase accountability of physicians in the process. And so even if criteria fall, with more accountability, you can have physicians or dangerous physicians be more shy to do some things, to do some bad things. And I think the population in general is quite open to enlarge the access to MAID, but is also quite open to render physicians more accountable. And another thing is that other more practical safeguards can be added to the law, like psychiatric evaluation mandatory before MAID, etc. So the thing is, we need also to prepare politically for the revision of the law. And in Quebec there will be a public consultation, so we can ask. It's a bargain. So we know that politicians want the criteria, the end of life criterion, and to fall, but I think it would be possible to bargain more accountability and some other safeguards, but we need to prepare. We need to prepare. And last thing, I think, and I agree with Adi there. I think the testimonies are very important, but we need to gather them. We have some testimonies from people here, from other people, so we have many, but we need to gather them in some creative way as to push them into the public sphere, into the media, to get more coverage. So I don't know how it can be done, maybe for further discussions. So that's something I wanted to say now. I got to go, so thanks for all.
Thank you.
Thanks to all, and
thanks,
see
Maxine.
you soon.
Maxine.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Merci. Okay. Anybody else want to add anything?
Yeah, this is Diane. I'd like to just maybe offer one thing. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes.
By the way, this has been fascinating, and it's really important for, me to be able to hear. I read the webcast every week, but I normally don't call in. And I'm really glad you had this type of a meeting where, it's just more personal to see you all and see what you're saying. And the comparisons with what's going on in the U.S. are, important. We're still in a battle state by state, so we've lost about 9 states, but we still have 40 to go, basically, and that fight goes on year after year. And I'm really glad about the way that you're comparing or bringing in the issues that the other disability-related issues, like being forced into nursing facilities and institutions, and I really sympathize with the struggle over media. A media strategy is used in the U.S. by the disability community that is very uncommon in Canada. And so I'm just going to throw it out as something that maybe people would want to keep in their mind, and that's called direct action. There are a lot of forms of direct action. It could be anything from a few people sitting in a government office to all the way up to big rallies and marches. The easy thing is to start with a few people at an office, or even at a nursing facility, going to the door of one that's holding people locked up who would like to live in the community, for example, considering what's been talked about. So I just want to be sure that that's in people's minds if it should end up percolating. I know it's not really as common to see that in Canada, but I think it would get media attention because it's so uncommon. Here it's kind of become old hat. They don't necessarily pay attention except at the local level. It's harder to get national media these days because we've done it for decades now.
Thank you.
I just say personally, I've been arrested more than 60 times in group protest for disability rights. That is why we have more home care, and it is why we have lifts on buses. And there's a few other things we got because of it over the decades, but it's just something to think about, to use judiciously as part of a broader strategy that includes everything else you've been talking about.
Media.
Taylor?
Diane, that's worth thinking about. I think Canadians may be too nice to follow in the footsteps of our ADAPT friends. Is this the time and place for my oxygen/DNR incident, Amy?
Yeah.
All right, then let's have at it. Almost 2 years ago, I was hospitalized. With pneumonia. I had gone to the walk-in clinic first with a cold, and they said, "Oh no, you're fine. Come back in a few days." But that was Wednesday, and by Saturday night, I was struggling to breathe. I went into the ER. Now, keep in mind, I live alone, and my family's 3 hours out of town, and my closest friends who I would normally call on to help me in a situation like this were out of town too. The doctor came to see me. She said, "We don't know what kind of infection you have, but there's a chance you may need oxygen if your lungs keep going sideways. Are you sure that's what you want? Are you sure you want oxygen?" And it took all I had not to get all up in her face and go, "Of course I do. Do you know what I do for a living? I read and I write about stories like this every day. I was not so taken aback by that. I never ended up needing the oxygen, stayed in the hospital for a week, had lots of friends come to visit, and was fine. But I came back to work, told Amy this story, and she was furious.
I was rip shit.
Yeah, it just highlights that, hospitals and healthcare professionals, sometimes they don't value our lives. They're trying to cure. If you cannot be cured, then you're no use to them. You're a waste of space, you're a waste of resource. And that's the way they've been brainwashed and trained. So, people as well should be cautious to put their lives in the hands solely of the healthcare professionals. That's nice. They're not all bad. I mean, you just need to find the physicians who are willing to work with you, not to work against you. So, but that's common. I talk to a lot of people in Quebec who face similar situation. It's like you go in the hospital because you got a pneumonia, and they ask you straight out, do you want to? Are you sure you want to have antibiotics? We can make you comfortable and let you die. Straight up. Well, I didn't come to the hospital to die. I came here to be helped and cured. So that's a recurring story. It happens often.
Just to build on what Jonathan said, I personally refuse to go into hospital myself. I want to show you my secret weapon. Hi. If this one knows how to put the fear of somebody into doctors. And if she's not available, immediately I go with someone else. But I know I'm privileged. Because I probably have more people to draw on in those cases than most. I did my college course while you were in hospital. I think this is another fact of life for people with disabilities. That Canada has to become aware of.
Maybe.
And like Diane said, maybe
we have to stop becoming
less polite. But that means not being Canadian. What?
Taylor, you want one thing to say?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. I just got a text from my cat's vet. Lisa and Ian says, sorry for my experience, and they have heard similar stories. Ian went to the ER for something minor this year, and very early on, before we knew what was wrong, a doctor asked, "Are you sure you want everything possible done for you?"
Come to the hospital.
Yeah, and it's incredibly violent when you have someone suggest that to you. It's like, well, your life is not worth living. Better to die. Think about it. Think really hard about it. And that's what they did to me. I was in the ICU, could not speak to anyone. I was in, had a tube down my throat, and they were asking me if I wanted to die. And you got no support, no one to talk to. You're left alone, and most people, they succumb to those pressures, and that's really violent, and that's very unfair to do to someone.
And, the people who promote euthanasia talk about autonomy, but when you're confronted in a power situation where you are both the patient and ill, and the person in power is essentially telling you they believe your life is not worth living, where is the autonomy in that situation? It just isn't,
That's right. Most people think that doctors are, infallible. They're, a figure of authority. They know everything, and they know what's best. But if you're not, trying to push back and have a good support system and are knowledgeable about all those issues, you can be very vulnerable. I didn't know anyone who had to go through things like that. I had no friends who had disabilities. I didn't know what was an institution. If at that time I knew what was an institution, I would have killed myself 100%. And that's pretty much one of the only things who saved me, other than my spouse and my family. I wasn't ready to die, but people are very vulnerable in those circumstances, and that's why peer support is so essential.
I'd just like to add, it's Pat.
Sure, go ahead.
I'd just like to add that as a social worker back in the 1960s, when I was working in a chronic convalescent hospital, we would never have thought of killing our patients. We had obviously training to deal with them, but we were aware that we were to do everything we could to save those patients, and I thank God that that was the case, because I was able to help some of the patients reconnect to family and that before they actually died of cancer. And without that opportunity, they may never have had a kind of a really good end of life in connecting with people that they hadn't seen or been connected with for some time. And so I was really very happy to do that. But I think it's because we were trained at that time. And everybody on the staff, this was at the hospital in Toronto, and everybody on staff, were doing everything they could to save the patient's life and to make them as comfortable and as possible. Whether they were admitted, whether they were discharged, or whether they were terminal and were to die there. So
yeah.
I think there's been an attitude change possibly within some of these hospitals and within some of the care facilities themselves.
There's no accountability, period. That has to change.
Yeah.
Because without that kind of fear lingering over the people that are in these medical fields, without that fear of them making a mistake or really crossing their T's and dotting their I's, I'm telling you, there's no accountability. So it's a free reign. It's free run.
Yeah. Okay.
Taylor?
Yes. Ian says we shouldn't have to fight the system for our lives when we go to the hospital.
No. I agree. That's when you're the most vulnerable of ever, is when you are in an emergency ward. You can't be any more vulnerable than that, because that quite often is a life or death situation. So if you are being fed information while you are laying there unable to really manage what's going on with you, without accountability, there is nothing that can be done. Someone has to be held accountable.
Yep.
That is what I think. I had to agree with Maxime. That is what our issue is going to be. That's why we're involving ourselves in this, because without the accountability, then it's just passing the buck along, you know, and at the most vulnerable we will ever be is in those situations. And to have someone else in control of our life, just nay or say, dependent on what they see in front of them without case history or study or anything, just be able to make that decision on our behalf takes away our very right to be a human being.
Okay.
So that's where I'm going to start. That's where Gary and I are going to start. We want changes made. In order to facilitate those changes with the laws, we have to start with someone needs to be held accountable, because the only way people are going to sit up and listen, doctors included, hospital facilities, care facilities, disability facilities, the only way people are going to sit up and listen is when those cases do hit the media of the doctors that are now going to be held accountable for legally murdering somebody. Right. It's a criminal offense.
Yeah.
Right. And I think we should do some outreach to police and the RCMP and find some champions in the corrections justice industry who would be ready to start looking at prosecutions, and because the law is going to be our main tool here. People in the human services field this is too difficult. I think in a lot of ways we're going to need to train police.
I agree.
And a lot of people, I think, don't want to speak up. There's a lot of people that don't want to speak up. They don't want the attention, or, you know, for whatever reason, you know, that their family member was depressed, and, you know, maybe there's some guilt or something associated, but they don't want to speak up and tell their stories. And it's those stories that really, you know, are part of the whole nucleus of what is happening in our healthcare system.
Oh, no, that's right. That's right. Sorry, go ahead.
What we're here for, though, gathering today, is to start something in motion. You know, I mean, we've written 27 letters, 27 different letters to different people to say, hey, how is this possible that this has happened? And other than one person, one MLA, it's fallen on deaf ears. There's been no movement for us. However, what we do hear through the grapevine is that it's getting attention in various areas of the healthcare system, but not to the point where we could, you know, rally them and move forward and change a bill.
Right.
You know, one case of wrongful death, holding a hospital, holding psychiatrists, psychologists accountable for what's happened in whatever their participation was in it. That's really where I think we need to drive, and then get the media to cover it.
Okay, I would like to suggest that I will send an email to everybody in this group with the link to the webcast, and that way you will all have each other's email addresses. And I would also like to suggest that you continue to be in touch with Toujours Vivant, Not Dead Yet, and the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition. You can reach our Facebook page at facebook.com/Toujours Vivant, Not Dead Yet, all one word. You can visit our website at tvndy.ca. You can email us at info@tv-ndy.ca, or you can follow us on Twitter @TVNDY. So I think we're going to wrap up, but thank you everybody for participating, and I really appreciate the time you've taken, and take good care. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, Amy. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Au revoir.
Au revoir. Au revoir.
Bye. Thank you.
Au revoir.
Bye.